hello. So good to see all you poets and artists tonight. It's a very somber occasion because it is the 6th anniversary of Mike Brown's passing and his murder. And I think, it's the mark of his greatness are all the events that's happening all over the country and all over the world tonight in response to his death and his life. Gonna kick off the evening tonight with a dear friend of mine and a great poet, Douglas Kearney. He's published 6 books, including the award-winning poetry collection Black Buck Studies, Finch Books, 2016, Libretti, Someone Took They Tongues, Subito, 2016, and Criticism, Mess and Naomi Press, 2015. His 7th collection, Show, is forthcoming this spring 2021 Wave Books. Doug Kearney teaches creative writing at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. I hand it over to you, Doug.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alma. This is an honor to be here on this somber occasion. I'm going to be reading from a section of the book that I know a few people are going to be reading from tonight. So this is David Witt. David, I want to thank you for taking some time out to chat with me. This issue is incredibly important, and you have a unique perspective as a resident in the Canfield Green apartment complex. Can you introduce yourself with your name and occupation? David Witt. My name is David Witt. I guess occupation, I'm an electrician by trade. I haven't worked in the electrician field since Obama became front runner of the Democratic Party. That's another reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. I believe watching the police will create that awareness that we really recognize where all of this comes from. And it always comes from top. Police are given orders. They don't make up their own orders. People forget that. Can you talk about how you watch the police? Are you part of an organization that does this? Witt. Cop Watch is basically an idea. The idea is that every citizen has the right to watch the police. We don't need permission to do so, and this is my form of protesting. What we do is I exercise my right to film the police. In addition to me exercising my right to film the police, I educate others in what their rights are and how they can film the police as well. At the end of the day, I might get somebody that wants to become a cop watcher, but the bigger picture is that people that didn't know what their rights were, they have a little better understanding what their rights were. A lot of times before I leave a person, I will try to make sure they understand what the 3 stops are. The casual stop, the detention, and the arrest. A lot of times, police are there to gather information. In a lot of cases, you're not even being detained. The police will ask you a lot of questions. You actually have the right to remain silent, or you have the right to walk away. You have to find out, are you being detained? So you ask the police officer, am I being detained? If the police say no, that's what you call a casual stop. In a casual stop, you don't have to cooperate with the cops. This is what you're doing in a casual stop. If you stay there and you continue to talk to the police, then you're cooperating with law enforcement, and you don't have to. I thought that was important. Some people think, I used to hear older folks talking about, yeah, you got rights, this, that, and the third, but just listen to the cops. Just do what the cops say, and then everything will be okay. I'm completely against that. The police work for us at the end of the day. I don't got to be feeling like no daggone suspect every time they're looking for somebody. Don't come ask me nothing.
Sure.
Leave me alone. That's how that.
No.
How did you get involved with Cop Watch and your service to your community, watching law enforcement and documenting the interactions that the community in Ferguson, and specifically around Canfield Green, have with law enforcement on a day-to-day basis? Witt. There was a guy from out of California, actually a guy by the name of Jacob Crawford. He's been working with Cop Watch he's been watching the cops for over 15 years with a camera. I always specify the fact about the camera because I've been watching the cops my whole life. I just didn't have no camera. I didn't document the police like how I'm doing now. I started doing that after Mike Brown's murder, but I've always watched the cops. And when this guy came in, it was kind of interesting the way I met Jacob. I met another guy who was an ex-police officer. He's not even tied with Cop Watch. But in being out here with the protests, you find a lot of different people. So I'm going to stop my reading there and just give a brief response to that reading. The idea of surveillance, or using surveillance techniques against people who are usually given some form of authority, whether that's formally or through conventions and culture, to surveil, is something that the writer Simone Brown writes a lot about in a book, Dark Matters. There are other writers who write about it as well. I was in Los Angeles in 1992. I was in high school when George Halliday filmed Rodney King being beaten by the LAPD, Arsenio Wren. So I'll avoid the passive construction, when the LAPD beat Rodney King. And that idea of being able to capture something on film as a form of evidence that seemed like it would be proof of the kind of gaslighting and denial that we usually encounter when we witness and speak and bear witness to violence, was the results of that still being inadequate, as we all know, from April 29th, 1992, was explosive. So thinking a lot about how Cop Watch functions, I was most drawn to the passage where he talked about the 3 different kinds of stops and your actual rights in terms of what you can do when a police officer encounters you. The other thing that I thought about a lot was the line, "The police work for us at the end of the day." And thinking about the nature of that us, I wrote this very short response, and then that'll be my time. Nature of that us and the nature of that work. Us. Someone pays for it. What work is done, someone puts in for it. When the work gets put in, someone pays for it. What work is done, someone puts up for it. Puts up for what work gets put in. Puts up for what the work put in gets done with. Puts up with what work is put in, what's done. The tax some taxed with to get taxed, paid for it. To be worked, taxed to get taxed, 2 times for 1 time, 12, 24-hour work at the end of the day. Working over, as in who gets worked is who gets taxed, taxed. Someone pays, put out for it. Someone pays to put someone out. Worked over and over and over and over. What is that work? Who owns it? Who gets owned when someone pays to get a tax, taxed and pays for it? What is 12, 24-hour work at the end of the day but making someone pay for something someone else put in for? If one says they see what offends them, whose eye will 1 time say need putting out? 2 times, 3 times, 4 we see. If 2 say they see what offends them, whose eye will 1 time say need putting out? Who say we need to put up with paying for it? What we see, we've been seeing before cameras. Who say we need to put up with it? That's it.
That was great, Doug. It's a way to, start the conversation. David Witt interview is such a strong, forceful critique on the government and the government's role and complicity in Mike Brown's murder. And you in Minnesota, you're with George Floyd and really at the epicenter of another lightning rod that pushes the conversation forward. I really appreciate you taking time out. Thank you.
I appreciate you for having me.
Yeah. The next reader is Noland. Noland is an artist, poet, photographer, born and working in New York City. As a poet and vocalist, she's performed in collaborative works at Jazz Fest Berlin, La Mama Gallery, the Kennedy Center DC, Roulette Intermedium, the University of New Haven, and other venues. Her photojournalistic work, archiving New York City artists and activist lineages, have been published by the Levy-Gorvey Gallery, the Brooklyn Rail, the Village Voice, the Independent, Bill Moyers, and others. Please welcome Noland.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. Thank you, Amma, for having me. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
I was drawn in your very expansive book, which I'm really grateful to now have, to the interview with Brother Bob Williams, who describes himself as, you just said, an artist, activist, organizer, actor, and a vital member of the community. And he likes to add there that he writes for printed media and does a lot of videoing and taking pictures in Ferguson, and he describes it as something that he likes to do regularly because news reporters were coming in and out a lot, but he maintained a steady archive presence there. And he gives a bit of insight into the history of what was happening in Ferguson before Mike Brown and some of the history that was happening there that I was drawn to. Just finding my ebook spot. He says, I've been in St. Louis since '56. In the 7th grade, I ended up going through high school there. Then I went to Harris Teachers College. I wanted to become a school teacher here in St. Louis, and I ended up with a bachelor in science in education. I attended graduate school for a year in 1968. I was only down there for a year. Not far from there, you have Cairo. Back then, they were shooting into all the black housing projects and demonstrations and boycotts. I was in St. Louis until 1964. He moves to Missouri. He went to Mexico with some progressive people, and then he decided I wanted to stay in St. Louis. So, yeah, it's just skipping ahead. You ask him, as a community organizer, what kind of organizing was happening here on the ground in St. Louis prior to the death of Mike Brown? Prior to the death of Mike Brown, not only here in Ferguson, Missouri, and North County, I would say the metro area here, we had very poor leadership. And when we look at conditions in these surrounding communities, lack of political education in terms of electoral politics, which is very important. I think the leadership has failed not to educate the people, especially the young people, about electoral politics and the importance of it, because I think that's where we win the victories, not with the gun. After Mike Brown's death, in terms of electoral politics, making people aware of the problems and the issues that have been unaddressed year after year. And then we see the deterioration in the black, brown, and poor white communities in this area. Even in my travels, I've seen it pretty well across this country. We got to have better schools, better job opportunities, job training. We see so many unemployed here in this area. And he describes himself as someone who listens to conservative talk radio. And yeah, then you ask him, when did you realize that the incident involving Mike Brown's death was different in Ferguson? It was different in that people took to the street in Ferguson. They were rebelling, they were angry, and they stayed in the streets. They didn't do like most of the time when a TV camera leaves and everybody fades back into the woodwork. The elected officials, the preachers, community organizers, people normally just die off. This has been a history not only here in St. Louis, but across the country. The energy of the young people stayed out in the street. So just some of his perspective. And I have some poetry here. Some old, some new, very brief. Police, no poet, longhand, typo in police report affecting jail time and who pays, intentional miscommunication, to communicate, deposit, funds, fictitious, boundaries, a series of dissonances provoked into explosions. I know it's a typo because I'm reading it. Careless, unfiles record, says inmates violent shakes is okay, and then vomit, a concocted brew of high disorder. Malintent in the cracks, wide, gaping mishears, a pelvic wound through a halo, a lie threaded through wounded TV. They get their tales from a different well than you or me. The war of reality, not so philosophic when it's the root cause of the blood sapping from the tree of knowledge. The folk radio came through reporters and reached crisscross cities undergoing the same notion of suffering at the expense of men who couldn't stop turning their heads, consumed with the chasing pennies operation, the man with the big mouth taking their time, in the shell game talking to shell game with no time to think, until a concocted brew of high disorder did blow. They get their tales from a different well than you or me. Liberty pursued, must flee, I see evil, malintent in the cracks, blue water for the suffering, blessed rock, in the palm of the poet, encircling all things with an invisible ring of healing. Thank you.
All right. Noah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Brother Bob Williams was really influential in making this book happen. When I met him at church, he invited me to go see Cecilia Nadal's play, which led to me getting 13 interviews. And his voice and his activism and his commitment to the people and fighting for justice is resounding. So thank you so much for sharing his words and your words with us.
I like how much he talked about the radio, the conservative radio. I'm curious about that. Thank you, Alma. Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome. Yeah. Talk radio. The next reader up is Jacqueline Johnson. She is a multidisciplined artist, creating in both poetry, fiction writing, and fiber arts. She is the author of A Woman's Season on Main Street Rag Press and A Gathering of Mother Tongues, published by White Pine Press, and is the winner of the 3rd annual White Pine Press Poetry Award. She's a graduate of New York University and the City University of New York, a native of Philadelphia, PA, and she resides in Brooklyn, New York. Jacqueline.
Oh, greetings, everyone. It's really good to be here. Alma, thank you for inviting me to participate in this. I'm going to start in the voice of Frida Wheaton. And one thing I want to say about Frida is she was not in Ferguson the day that Michael Brown was murdered. She was actually on a road trip for the looking at sites for the civil rights movement. And she did not get back in town until the following day. So I'll start with her voice. My name is Frida L. Wheaton. I am a 35-year resident of the city of St. Louis. Originally, I am from Jackson, Mississippi. That's my home. Thank you for coming to my home and my gallery, which is Salon 53. I'm a person who is very much engaged in the arts community here at this time. I am a lawyer by profession. I no longer engage in the act of practicing law. I am retired after 30 years as in-house counsel for 2 major corporations. I'm a private curator and I'm an arts advocate. How did you hear that a young African-American male had been killed in North County in Ferguson? In early August, I took a road trip with 2 friends. We went to Alabama, and our road trip included some educational discovery trips. From St. Louis, we went to Birmingham, Montgomery, to Selma. And during those stops, we went to key centers of the civil rights movement. I received a phone call on Sunday, August 10th, from a good friend who was basically letting me know that something was going on in Ferguson. People were protesting, and there was a lot of trouble and things going on. And did I know about it? Certainly, I did not know. When you became more aware of what was happening in the world, specifically Ferguson, North County, what was your response? My initial response personally was anger, was sadness, was outrage. I knew that I needed to channel that, but I also knew that I needed to just let it be and experience what intuitively I felt I personally needed to experience. And that was to go to Ferguson and to be a part of the community of people who were also outraged and angry and sad. To be a part of the spirit of the protest that was going on in those initial days. I actually spent a few days in that early part, driving up and down West Florissant Avenue and throughout the North County community with my sunroof open, my hands in the air, blowing my horn, waving to people on either side of the road, basically cheering on those who were on the sides of the streets protesting. At a later point, I also parked the car, got out, and protested. And time passes. At some point after the decision by the grand jury not to indict Officer Darren Wilson on charges, the peaceful protest shifted into a much more violent demonstration. What were some of your thoughts about the shift away from the peaceful protests? At the time of what you describe as the shift, there was a period of time before that where I had engaged the arts community in curating an exhibition titled Hands Up, Don't Shoot, Artists Respond. That is how I channeled my own energies in terms of recognizing a need to document, to capture artistically what was going on in society in this community, because I knew that this was not a temporary thing. What I did at the time, we were still in the month of August in terms of my initial reaction. I put together a call for artists that went on nationwide, inviting artists to produce and to present art that spoke to the legal and societal questions raised by the killing of Michael Brown. That led to a question of where will this art be shown? During the early days of the protests, I was engaged in trying to identify venues where the art could be shown because I had in mind to have all of this art shown at 18 different venues. 18 was chosen because that would be one venue for each year of Michael Brown's life. What we ended up with was we also had venues at the St. Louis University Museum, the Central Library in downtown St. Louis, Ferguson Municipal Public Library, and various other venues. I'm kind of skipping around. We had openings on October 17th and 18th of 2014, about 11 openings on the Friday and the balance on the Saturday. They were all well received and very well attended. In your opinion, who are the real heroes here in St. Louis, in Ferguson, North County? I'm not sure, quite frankly, what you mean by heroes. I never thought of what happened within this area and Ferguson and the aftermath to be a situation where there are heroes or non-heroes. Of course, the protesters as a group received, I think it was Time Magazine's Person of the Year. I think all of the people who protested, however they chose to do it, those people who spoke out and who organized and who walked the streets in all kinds of weather were very important to continuing to keep the issues of justice and civil rights at the forefront. I couldn't speak to any individual or groups or groups of individuals in particular about being heroes. I think certainly the parents of Michael Brown, in my view, carried themselves extremely well in representing their son and the injustice of how he died in the days following his death. I don't know who the heroes are, if there were any heroes. Maybe that story is to be told by someone else. Who would you say are the victims? To be a victim, there has to be a perpetrator. Have you decided who the perpetrators are that cause a group of people or individuals to be a victim? You know the number one victim is Michael Brown, his family, his friends, the people who were with him, the people who truly knew him, and the people who miss him and who continue to miss him. I went to Michael Brown's funeral service, which was extremely packed and well attended by family, friends, and strangers alike. I went there to get a sense of that loss. Again, being in this community and being of an age where I knew that this would be a series of events that would live long after the immediate future. I wanted to be there to observe, particularly because of my engagement in the arts effort with respect to his killing. There are probably a lot of victims. We know who the perpetrators were of a lot of the wrongs that happened in Ferguson, particularly the wrong on August 9th. I would say that the number one victim, of course, is Michael Brown, and we read my response. Frida L. Whitten is a daughter of the region and a beneficiary of the civil rights movement. She is from that generation that understood the power of getting a good education in order to secure a better future than her parents. She is a retiree and an elder at the point she becomes active in the Ferguson protests. She could have remained home and hid, but she went right into the heart of the protests. Frida L. Wheaton is an insider, not one who came across state lines to agitate or distort the efforts of the protests. She is an esteemed elder, activist. When I think of Frida Wheaton's service to the Ferguson community in the form of providing legal information to protesters, and in the creation of the Hands Up, Don't Shoot, Artists Respond exhibition, I am in awe that she mounted the show in about 6 weeks and was able to get 14 arts institutions to open their doors for the show. That can only be done by someone who is inside the community, who knows who's who, and whom to call upon, and in turn is known by the larger community. I thank her for her understanding of timing and the need for quick action, and most of all, the need to not only be an observer, but a player and actor in the Ferguson protests, to find an outlet for the collective rage of that community, and to be expressed in a healthy way, and to provide a healthy way to honor the memory of Michael Brown. Long live Michael Brown.
Yes, long live Michael Brown. Long live his memory.
Yes.
Frida Wheaton, that interview I got because of Dawood Bey. And she was the last person I interviewed. And when she told me what she had been doing and how she had been going to these historical civil rights sites and monuments and trying to find artifacts to commemorate our history and retain that history, she was really a powerful person to be in a room with. I'm so grateful that you read her interview, a little bit from her interview. The next reader is Jacob Wren. He makes literature, performances, and exhibitions. His books include Polyamorous Love Song, Rich and Poor and Authenticity is a Feeling. As co-artistic director of the Montreal-based interdisciplinary group PME Art, he has co-created performances such as Individualism Was a Mistake, The DJ Who Gave Too Much Information, Every Song I've Ever Written, and most recently, the online conference Vulnerable Paradoxes. His internet presence is often defined by a fondness for quotations. Everybody, give it up for Jacob Wren.
This is such an amazing book. It was really remarkable to read it over the past few weeks. I'm going to read a little bit from Representative Sue Meredith. This is from page 210. I think that we need to take a look at the full picture and see what we can do. We need to break the cycle of poverty, first of all. We need to get parents to be able to have time with their children to teach them how to be people and care about others. We need to have our police officers and other security type people, firefighters and so forth, all be sensitive or sensitized in some way to better understand the people that they're supposed to be protecting. If people are scared, they're going to be scared on both sides. They're afraid of each other. The police are afraid. I don't understand that part. The people in the neighborhoods are afraid of the police. The people in the neighborhoods are afraid the police might come after them and shoot them for nothing. They didn't do anything, but they're going to get shot at or they're going to get a ticket. Because they see it, they get a taillight out, they get a ticket. Then they can't get to court to pay that ticket, so they get fined because they're late. Then they get interest charges on that, and they get fined. Next thing you know, that taillight's a $3,000 bill, which they cannot pay. Of course, they feel oppressed. The legislature actually did one thing. Did it pass? I can't remember. Things got crazy at the end. Yes, they did. I think they did pass it. They decided to limit the amount of money that municipality can make off of traffic incidents. Not the amount, but the percent. If you have the city budget, this is statewide, and more than 20% of the revenue of the municipality comes from traffic tickets, speeding, lights out, drunk driving, swerving around, whatever, only 20% of that total income can come from those kinds of incidents. If they collect more than 20%, anything over that goes into a special fund for the schools, except in St. Louis County. In St. Louis County, the municipality can only make 12.5% of its revenue from traffic incidents. There's a city up here, St. Anne. I talked to an alderwoman up there Friday morning, and she said that they're going to have to let about a third of their police force go because they can't afford to have them anymore. I'll just stop there. I chose this passage because it ends with the fact that they're going to have to let a third of their police force go because they can't afford to have them anymore. And this reminded me of something that we're hearing a lot about right now, about defunding the police and prison abolition. And I think we all know this is what has to happen. We have to defund the police and put the money back into community-led initiatives. And we have to abolish prisons. And here it was happening a little bit by accident. But it's important that it happens on purpose as well. And I will end there. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Jacob. That, Sue Meredith, she didn't really mince words in her interview. I stayed with the Merediths while I was doing this project because Mike Meredith was my colleague at Organizing for Action when I was a fellow for President Obama. And his wife is Sue Meredith. So thank you so much for sharing her words and sharing about that ticketing scheme and ticketing schemes in general, and how it is very relevant to the conversation around defunding the police departments right now and reallocating funds to more community services. So thank you so much for bringing up all of those points. Thank you. All right, Mr. Schott, Danny Schott, was a longtime publisher, editor of Long Shot, Arts and Literary Magazine, which he founded along with Eliot Katz in 1982 in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Born in the Bronx, raised in Dumont, New Jersey by German Jewish refugees, Danny graduated Rutgers in 1980 with a BA in English. Danny is currently head of poetry editor at Red Fez, an online magazine, www.redfez.net, and an associate editor at Tribes Online. He lives in Hoboken, New Jersey, home of Frank Sinatra and baseball. Danny Schott.
Thank you. It's an honor to be part of this group, and I'm glad to see some friends in the little boxes on my screen. I'm going to be reading from my Kindle, and I chose Cecilia Nadal. My name is Cecilia Nadal, and I'm currently the executive director of Gitana Productions. Gitana is an unusual arts organization because our primary goal is to use the arts as a vehicle for bringing diverse people together in acceptance and understanding. We see ourselves as global healers. In St. Louis, where there's a great deal of segregation, both in class as well as ethnicity, there's a large amount of work that needs to be done in that regard because we are a quite segregated city. My background is that I taught as a sociologist at a community college for about 4 or 5 years. Part of my background in teaching is in criminal justice. I provided the social deviancy explanations to criminal justice to police officers, as well as people going into courtrooms. I once was the head of a halfway house for women who were ex-offenders. I'm going to skip a couple of pages. From the beginning, in coming to St. Louis, I was really struck by the segregation. It just blew me away. It was just not on the streets, but it was within St. Louis University. I decided very quickly that there was a role that I needed to play, but I was also struck by how hard it was. For example, I was a member of SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, but I also was a member of the Association of Black Collegians, and all of a sudden I saw clashes. People could not understand why I would be a member of both. I vacillated between the two very easily because I saw the scope of what they wanted to do was the only way I could get to all the things I had an interest in. I've always been on that marginal fence of moving in and out and trying to bring people together and see that the advantages are in collaboration and moving forward. My relationship to St. Louis started with coming to St. Louis U. I've lived in this city most of my life. I love this city. Now I'm going to skip a few pages again. Okay, and here, for me, I've been busy trying to do work of connecting and change. I was doing that before Michael Brown, and then all of a sudden, my priorities got changed. And Amma asks, how so? And Cecilia says, the priorities got changed because one of the more recent things that I've been focused on is bringing together Latinos and African Americans. We've done a lot of work with the Chinese community, Indian community, that kind of thing. It had been a long time. The last time I really dealt with social justice issues was when we dealt, and this was more of an international basis, when we did a play on Darfur, and I was interested in presenting why that was important to St. Louis. That was the connection. All of a sudden, with all the work that I have done with people who are oppressed, it was like, okay, it's time. This is the time that we need to bring some explanation to this complicated issue. My priorities got changed. I went out as a citizen to engage in the protest because I was appalled by the idea that this young man was laying in his own blood for 4.5 hours, that the police department came out within days showing a video. They were to explain who the police officer was, and they came out with a video showing Michael Brown coming into a convenience store, and they claim in the video that he was stealing cigarillos, and that's what precipitated this whole thing. I just looked at all of that and I said, I'll be damned. It was unbelievable. I was out in the protest and I didn't really know how I would connect to this. And I'm going to stop there. What drew me to this passage is Cecilia Nadal herself. And what draws me into the book is each character's personal story. And I know that's not really the point of the book, but what intrigues me is not each person's opinions about or recollections of Michael Brown's murder, but more so their backstories. And that's just the way I'm wired. Simply, Cecilia Nadal seems like a righteous, hardworking, socially conscious woman. As someone, myself, who spent 33 years as a New York City public high school English teacher, I had to constantly remind myself that I'm not looking at yet another group of 34 students, but 34 individual young adults with each and every body housing a world of thoughts, desires, emotions, memories. And each one, or at least the overwhelming majority, no matter what their flaws, is important as they sit around their kitchen tables with their mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers. And that individual is Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin and Eric Gardner and Botham Jean and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Philandro Castillo, and the list can go on and on. These people, the way I see it, are not just symbols, but individuals who were precious, and each of them carrying an entire world within them. So that's why I chose Cecilia Nadal's narrative.
Thank you, Danny. Wow, yeah, Cecilia Nadal is a powerful figure in St. Louis. Culturally, she recently won an award from the state of St. Louis for her contributions to arts over the course of her life, I believe from the governor. And her daughter is a state representative, Maria Chappelle Nadal, who is very active vocally, expressing her opinions, and was very active during the Ferguson riots or protests, depending on how you'd like to phrase that. Thank you so much, Danny. Next reader up is Maggie Wrigley. She is an artist, activist, and writer, and co-editor of The Architecture of Change, Building a Better World. She has lived at Bullet Space on the Lower East Side in New York since squatting there in 1987. Welcome, Maggie Wrigley.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, thank you so much, Alma. It's a mighty book, and there's so many voices and so many perspectives and places it takes us. But I was also really drawn to Frida Wheaton and her perspective on this place and her historical perspective. So I'm just going to read the end of her interview. Alma says, "You've mentioned twice that you knew that this situation was going to have longevity, that this situation is going to actually have a lifespan that was going to be not just a flash in the pan. What, based on your years of experience and knowledge, your knowledge of history, your knowledge of the past, informed you that this case, this situation was going to have that kind of perpetuity?" Frida Wheaton: "Well, look, this year we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Selma. Last year it was the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. We are a nation who remember. We are people, Black people. We remember, and we document those things that have seminal impact on our well-being, on our lives, and on our place in society. Because of how Michael Brown was killed, how his body lay there for hours without his mother being allowed to approach him and to embrace him, and the outrage of all those circumstances, it seemed clear to a lot of people that this wasn't just another Black kid being killed by another police officer. I think it was clear that the nation really had had enough. However, we also know that it's happened since Michael Brown as well, any number of times. At some point, we wonder, will it ever end? I think there have been a number of steps taken, probably not enough and probably not as forcefully enough, to change the way police officers and law enforcement in general react to and respond to young Black men they encounter in various scenarios. But I think because of Michael Brown and the global impact and knowledge, because of social media and simply because of media, can you imagine if we had social media 50 years ago in Selma, Alabama, how that would have impacted things? We didn't have it, and we're still commemorating these critical anniversary dates, because what happens if you forget your history, you are going to repeat the history. If you forget the history or never know your history, that's not a good thing in terms of the future or the people who are most affected by it. Where do you see this dialogue moving in the next 20 years? Frida Wheaton: wow, this is 2015. In 2035, I would say some of the same conversations that are being held will be held in 2035. I think while there's always an immediacy of action and a response contemporaneously with certain events in history, sometimes the lessons learned are not learned well at all, and history does repeat itself. My hope, of course, is that the killing of any unarmed person, Black, white, Native American, Caucasian, whatever, will stop, because there has to be another way to control who might be an offender, but certainly to do short of something killing them by firearm or otherwise. Yeah, I think she's terrific. And I wanted to read just, as this goes on and as we still respond and try to fight. This is a poem that I wrote, a short poem that I wrote for Abolition Park in New York City after George Floyd. The mess of bodies across grass and asphalt defies the stiff posture of uniforms. I cheer them, couched in glamorous disregard for comfort, seizing the authority that politicians abdicated. A hive: food, water, medical supplies, shelter, protection, inside, outside, sprawled across the city land, in grief of murder. They claim the hill. In power, they raise the ground up. Thank you, Alma. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Maggie. That was, thank you for sharing that and tying, what was going on at Abolition Park and the current conversation around George Floyd and Occupy, and how Occupy, really Occupy and Black Lives Matter are two parallel movements that have been moving together, and they converge, more and more, I think, as the years go on. Thank you so much. The next reader is Suzanne Goldenberg. She's a New York City-based artist, activist, and writer. Her poems have appeared in English Language, Leaf Litter, and the Boston Review. The author of Help Wanted, 2015, and her forthcoming book, Going Pro. She hosts the Crush Reading Series at the Woodbine Collective. Everybody, Suzanne Goldenberg.
Thanks, Alma. And thanks to all the readers. This is such a powerful thing to participate in. And I've just been poring over this book. I also chose Cecilia Nadal. I found her fascinating in her range of going from being a correction, teaching criminal justice, working with young women offenders, ex-offenders, and then now running this theater group and talking about the healing power of art and bringing people together. And I'm just going to read an excerpt from your interview with her, which was amazing because her sister kept jumping in and out. And okay, I'll just start. I'm going to start with where Alma is talking, and then we'll hear from Cecilia. So basically, Alma is talking about having seen her play, which I'm so happy to hear that you got all these interviews from that experience. So Alma says, I was struck because actually I got to see the play, at least most of it, and I was struck just by the echoing of the idea of the crossroads, and that Ferguson is a place of crossroads. In my opinion, the United States is at a crossroads. Cecilia Nadal, no question. Involving talking about race relations and talking about the role of law enforcement within the community. Cecilia, let me say this to you, and this has to be said, and this is a personal point of view. From the standpoint of effectiveness in dealing with the issue, if what happened to Michael Brown had happened in the city of St. Louis, it would have never have gone as far as it did. You know why? Because the police would have stamped on that so completely, and the people who understood how important this was would not have come. They would not have been right there. They might have been right there, but they would have been the ones who stayed in their house and didn't come out because they've got something going on. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. Cecilia. It's very interesting that it happened at Ferguson, but it happened for the whole region because it's affected the whole region, and it will continue to affect the entire region. Alma, you're saying because there was a high density of middle-class people that was one of the reasons why Ferguson was able to gain traction? Cecilia, let me be very specific with you. The person who called the media, his name is David Royal, and David Royal is an ex-Marine who was in Iraq, and he lived in Canfield Apartments. Alma says, I know David Royal. Cecilia, okay. David went to Rankin Technical College. He's got a huge family. He got out on the streets and he called. When he recognized it was a police shooting, he quickly, and his mother is a cop, he quickly called the press and said, you've got to come out here. If that had happened in most areas of the city, and I hope I don't sound like a generalist, but I'm going to sound like that now, it would have been, oh, here's another one. Oh, stay inside and leave it alone because they're used to that. Are you following me? They are not used to that at Canfield. This was something that was out of the ordinary. David is not an impoverished, oppressed man. He is a man that comes from a middle-class background, trying to make it with 8 kids and going to school. Are you following me? He was outraged, and he had had enough presence of mind to call the police immediately or call the media and get the media out there right away. I don't think that would have happened in the city of St. Louis because folks in poor neighborhoods in the city are so used to this day in and day out, but they're not used to that out in Ferguson. They have gone to Ferguson because they're looking for a better life. Are you following me? The likelihood of that happening is very low. Why do I say that? Because there have been many incidents in the city of St. Louis that could have precipitated this kind of event, but it did not because those around it accepted it as being part of life on a daily basis. Does that make sense? Amma says, yeah, absolutely. So Cecilia says, I'm sure it could be researched and validated. It's maybe happened hundreds of times. And then I'm going to just read Amma's comment and jump to a few paragraphs. So Amma says, I wanted to talk a little bit about the art that's come out of this incident. You created a play, but I've also just been really amazed by all the street art and the way that the buildings, the windows that were boarded up were then turned into murals. A lot of them with the very positive affirmations that reiterated the need for peace and healing and solidarity. When you think about this art that's been created by, obviously this was more akin to graffiti art or street art as we would call it, is the Ferguson movement coming up like this? Or is the Ferguson movement more of a top-down movement? And can that be seen through the cultural tenets of the work that's being created by artisans in the area? Cecilia, oh boy, let me see if I can get to the essence of what you're asking. And she talks more about, I'm trying to edit so I don't take up, but I really hope people get this book because it is fascinating. She's saying, I'm just glad that they did it. I don't care whether they're middle class or lower class. I'm just glad they did it because that's a statement to everybody that there are people who are concerned. If you look at the nature of the art that has been done, there's definitely some difference. For example, if you talk to Frida Wheaton is an African-American attorney, and she was part of the Black artist response to Ferguson. The way she went at it and what they depicted was very different than some of the artists who boarded up and put peace things on it. They wanted to tone it down. They wanted it to be quiet. They wanted people to deal with things in a way that was peaceful. It reminds me of what one of my board members, who's white, said. She said, it's interesting that Black folks in St. Louis talk about justice and white folks talk about peace. Her point was that we talk about justice a lot because we're affected by it. Those who talk peace are talking peace from the standpoint of quiet it down, don't make it so bad, don't keep doing this. It's two different strands. We've got to put the two together in order to have power. So I was really taken by this articulation of her talking about these struggles in terms of class, but also talking about the necessity of seeing that this, notion of peace is only going to come with the insistence on justice. And also, I think I was taken by that articulation because of what I find infuriating obsession with property damage and characterization of this insurrection or movement as one of violence and this focus on, how are we going to enact justice? How are we going to put power behind our movement?